probably your hardest one. These won't be too bad. Okay, so we're rounding. We rounded it before the midterm, but now we're rounding in terms of decimals. And your first one says we're going to take this number and we're going to round to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so remember we have tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. So if I was rounding to the nearest hundredth, that means I'm going to round to 7, and it's called the 5-up rule. I'm either going to keep it as 0.67, or I'm going to round it up. It's never going to go down. It's either going to stay the same or go up. And it all depends upon what's behind it. So since this 9 is more than 5, that means it's going to go up. So this would be 0.68. And that's how it would look as the nearest hundredth. Now, but what if I asked you to do the nearest thousandths? Okay, so I have tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. Okay, so thousandths would be what the 9 is. So it's either going to be 0.679 or 0.67, that's going to go up. So if you rounded up 79, that actually becomes, the digit up from 679 would be 680. So it's one of those two. Now, what goes from there is we're basing it off of this number here. Since this number here is less than 5, there's no rounding up. If it's 5 or greater, you round up. If it's 5 or less, you keep it alone. So keep it as it is. So this is just going to be 0.679. Okay, and so then they add or subtract. Okay, now what you have to know about adding and subtracting decimals is that you have to line up your decimal places. So if I have 9.844 and I have 8.31, those two decimal places have to line up. Now I can put a 0 here to hold the place, but those two decimal places line up. I'm going to use a different color. So the two decimal places line up, and also the one in your sum, it's going to line up as well. And then you just add them. So this would be 4, this would be 5, this would be 11, so I carry, and that's 17 plus 1, which is 18. So my answer is 18.154. Subtracting is a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to have 3.757. You always want to put your bigger number on the top. I'm going to have 2.995. Now remember when I'm doing these, there's a decimal, there's a decimal, there's a decimal. So remember to put your decimal in your answer. And it goes straight in a column. Okay, 7 minus 5 is just 2, so that's not too bad. But I can't subtract 9 from 15, so I have to borrow. Let me say that again. I can't subtract 9 from 5, so I have to borrow. So I'm going to borrow from this 7, which makes this a 15. 15 minus 9 would give me 6. Okay, I can't subtract 9 from 6, so I have to borrow, which means this one's going to make this 16. 16 minus 9 would give me 7, and I have a 0 here. So the answer would be 0.762, which is 762 thousandths. Okay, so then they ask you to multiply. Well, that's a whole different ballgame, multiplying and dividing. I'm going to skip over for just a second. There's one more subtraction. So I wanted to go ahead and jump to the subtraction. This number that I have here is 532.2. Now when I get ready to line up the 41, the decimal has to go here, and the decimal has to go here in the answer. So this is 41.643. Now, you can put zeros here to hold the place, and this is how we're going to subtract. Now this one's actually pretty difficult. You can't subtract 3 from 0, but you also can't borrow because it's 0. So look at that last group of numbers. See how you have it as 2, 2, 0, 0? Instead of worrying about borrowing from here and this one not having enough, think about it as if you were borrowing from 200. So instead of taking 643 from 200, let's say you borrowed from this one Let's say it a little differently. Let's start back over with it. You can't take 3 away from 0, nor can that 0 borrow from the next one. So instead of borrowing from 0, which you can't do, borrow from 20. So if you borrow from 20, this becomes 19, and then you can take care of your borrowing. So sometimes you have to borrow from more than one place, more than one digit. So 10 minus 3 would give me 7, and 9 minus 4 would give me 5. I can't deal with that 1, so I'm going to borrow, and this becomes a 5. 1 minus 1 is 0. I'm going to borrow here, and this gives me a 9 and a 4. And that's what that one should look like. 490, decimal, 557. Okay, now when you multiply, it's a whole different ballgame. So you can line them up. Decimals do not have to line up. You just line up the one with the most number of digits on the top. Doesn't even have to be the biggest one. Whichever one has the most digits, that's what goes on the top. Okay, so then we'll multiply. So 7 times 3 is 21, and I'll carry. That's 35 with 2 would be 37, and I'll carry. 7 times 4 is 14. That's 7 times 2 is 14. 14 and 3 give me 7, and I'll carry. 7 times 1 is 7. 7 plus 1 is 8. Okay, so then we'll multiply the 6. 6 times 3 is 18, but remember when I multiply by the 18, I need to scoot it over so it lines up with the 6. Okay, so 6 times 3 is 18. 6 times 5 is 30 plus 1 would be 31. 6 times 5 is 12, and 3 would be 15. And 6 times 1 is 6 plus 1 would be 7. And then we add them up. So we get 1, 15, we carry. That gives me a 9. 13, we carry, and that gives me an 8. Now, here's the kicker. That's not your answer. You have to put your decimal back in. If you look up here, you use your decimal. See this decimal here? That was 1 decimal place, 2 decimal places, 3 decimal places. So if you start here and move it 1, 2, 3 decimal places, you get 83.951. Okay, so there's another one of those to try over here. So let's try this one. So the numbers aren't quite as big. We have We'll get it where it's not green in just a second. 15.1 times 3.7. Now it just so happens that the decimals lined up here, but that was just how that wasn't intentional. You just put the one with the most digits on the top. So when you multiply 3 by 7, you get 7. 35, bring your 3 up, and that 7 times 1 is 7 plus 3 is 10. 3 times 1, remember to scoot it over where you're lined up with a 3. 3 times 5 is 15, and 3 times 1 is 3 plus 1 gives me 4. Adding them up, I get a 7 and an 8 and a 5 and a 5. So we have to decide where to put our decimal place. Well, I use 1, 2 decimal places. So 1, 2, I would get 55.87. And that's what I get for that one. So then you have the division. Now, if you printed out the blank notes, you saw that you had a problem, 23.65 divided by 33. That was bad, and it was ugly. So we're not going to work that one. We'll work one a little bit easier. It's not easy, but it's a little easier. So I have the divisor 5.3, and I'm going to divide that into 138.33. Now I can't do that. The reason you can't do that is you can't divide by a decimal. You can't. So since you can't divide by a decimal by rule, I need to move this decimal one place over to get 53. But you can't just move a decimal one place over and not have something to counteract it. So I'm going to move this one place over as well. And so that's 1. Let's see, I'll screen messed up. If I move this one over one place, I have to also move this one over one place. So I'm going to get 1383.3. So I get 1383.3. Now here's what I did. You can't divide by a decimal, so you had to move it over one place, and I moved it over one place. So now I have a new problem. 53 goes into 1383.3. Now when I'm dividing by a decimal, I'm going to put my decimal right there. 53. Okay, so it's not easy to multiply, but we can think of it like 50, and 50 times 2 would be close to 100, so we'll try that. So 2 times 3 gives me 6, and 10 here. Okay, so 50 should go into 326 times. 31, there we go. Okay, so I can borrow here. This is going to be a 5. And 53 goes into 53 one time. So I get an answer of 26.1. And that's how we